name is Gideon. Common name among my people, the Hebrews. It just denotes an ordinary man, just in the everyday issues of life. It's not that significant. In fact, the meaning of my name means hacker of trees. Hacker of trees. How more common is that? It speaks of common labor. But I would be called at one point in my life Jerubbaal. My father would give me that name. The name Jerubbaal means hero. It speaks of one who contends with Baal, the pagan god, and who overcomes and conquers, who is victorious against him. So, I guess the question might be, am I a hacker of trees or a hero who contends with Baal? A hero or a hacker? I would ask you, who are you? Some people say you are who others think you are. And some say that you are who you yourself think you are. But really it is a matter of who God says that you are. God looks at our lives and He wants to bring us to a place of a new beginning. He wants to bring us to a place to move us from fear to faith in Him, in a personal relationship with the living God. So you can be a hacker of trees, just a mere common ordinary vessel, or you could be someone who is used by the hand of God. I want to tell you my story, how I came to the place where God put His hand upon me and used me. It goes back to the time when my people had been in the darkest part of their history. It was a time when evil prevailed, when men did what they chose to do according to their own dictates, according to their own whims. Every man did what was right in his own sight. And God brought judgment and chastisement against the people of Israel. And He would often raise up a pagan people as a means of disciplining them and judging them. And so He did. He rose against the people of Israel, the Midianites, and their allies, the Amalekites, and other people from the eastern countries. And those who coalesced together in a great and mighty army came against the people of Israel. For 7 years they plagued my people. For 7 years they tormented us. It was like asthma. It came every season in the spring and in the fall of the year. Just about the time we would sow the crops in the field, here they would come, and they would come in droves, sweeping across the land all the way to Gaza. And they would annihilate every crop in the field. They would kill the livestock in the pens. They would take what they could carry among themselves and go back to their homelands and leave the people of Israel devastated and tormented. And just about the time you would think that it had all subsided, and here they would come again. The reason they were able to conquer with such swiftness and such totality and such speed is because they came in a caravan of camels. The camels allowed them to have speed to come in and quickly depart, leaving the land totally devastated. It happened again and again, as I've said, and my people were crushed. They were broken. They were just tormented. They were weakened. And they had no purpose. They cried out to God in those days. They cried out to God, and God did hear. God did respond. He spoke. He spoke in two ways. He spoke so that they could hear what God was saying. And He spoke so they could see what God saw. So He could turn their hearts back to them, to Himself. To hear what God says, He raised up a prophet A prophet who would proclaim the word of God. Thus saith the Lord. And the prophet came in among the people and went throughout the land, proclaiming and preaching the truth of God's word and calling people back to the holy scriptures that were written, that were recorded. And thus saith the Lord, stirring the hearts of God's people. He reminded them how he had again delivered them by the mighty power of God against their enemies, the Egyptians, when they came out of Egyptian bondage, and how he had brought them into the land of promise, and how he had conquered their enemies again and again and again. The prophet came forth, and he did not name himself. He did not draw attention to who he was or what he was about, because it doesn't matter who he is. What matters is the message that he proclaimed, and it was the message of God. And the people needed to hear the word of God. They needed to understand something. Their problem was not the Midianites that would raid the land and terrorize them, so much so that they had to flee to the hills and hide in the caves. They had to scrimp and save what little grain they could amass for themselves to feed their families until the next season, and they might scrimp a little bit more before it was all totally destroyed. They needed to understand the enemy was not the Midianites, but it was because they had turned against the living God and they had worshiped Baal. The people of Israel had fallen into dark idolatry. They had built Asherah poles on every hill, worshiping the pagan gods of the Canaanites and the false teaching of the Ammonites. All of these false religions, that's what they needed to turn from. They needed to hear that God was calling his people back to the truth of who he is and what he had to say to them. That he did love his people Israel with an everlasting love. But they also needed to see what God sees. You see, sometimes we have our perspective, we have our focus, and it's misdirected, it's misguided. It is not accurate. That was the case with me particularly. I was there in my home trying to work out in the wine press some threshing of some grain. I was hiding in the wine press because it was below ground level. And the Midianites coming across the land, they couldn't see me down within the winepress, thrashing out the grain, preparing just a little sustenance for our family to be able to sustain themselves for a short period of time. You couldn't do much down in the winepress. You surely couldn't go up above where it could be winnowed in the wind and the dry grass could blow off and the seeds could be perhaps prepared for bread. No, I was hiding there, terrified just like everyone else in my country. And off, down in the distance, down the road, a stranger came. He had a long robe. He looked like a weary traveler. He just simply sat down on the edge of the roadway. I was concerned about who he was and what he had come into our land for. And so I went to him and I inquired of who he was and where he had come from. He spoke not in answer to my questions, but he looked at me and he said, "Hail, valiant warrior. Hail, valiant warrior. The Lord is with thee." What a word was this? I said, "Sir," using the common terminology to just a gentleman I would call sir to anyone. I saw no distinction about him at first. "What do you mean, the Lord is with me? If the Lord is with us, how come we're going through all of this? If the Lord is with us, how come we're seeing our land devastated and our people in want and suffering? If the Lord is with us, why are there no miracles as in the days when God delivered people from Egypt and from bondage? Where are those miracles? Where is God's presence with us right now? I don't see it. I certainly don't believe that it is a possible thing to experience. Well, He showed me something. He showed me the Lord was indeed with me. And He called me valiant warrior because He saw something I didn't see. I only saw weakness. I only saw frailty. But He looked beyond this superficial flesh and He saw what God wanted to do, bringing me to a place from fear to faith. I saw that this man was not just an ordinary stranger, but in fact, he was the Lord of hosts. And He had come into our midst. And He came to do a work in me. I was skeptical, but I said, if you are the Lord, and you do have a word for me, that I should go and be a deliverer of my people, Israel, that I should be one that God would raise up and use in a powerful way, then stay here while I go and prepare an offering, and you would receive it. And it would be that would be acceptable to the Lord. And he said, I'll stay. I will receive the offering. So I went and prepared a goat and broth and bread, and I brought it back and placed it before him. He took the offering and he placed it upon a rock. And then he took his staff and he touched the offering on the rock, and the rock burst forth into flame and consumed the sacrifice. I knew that I was in the presence of the living God. I was terrified. And I knew when he brought forth fire from the rock to consume the sacrifice that God had spoken to me. I called the place of sacrifice Jehovah Shalom, because the God of glory had shown peace to me when he could have devastated me because of my sinful heart. He brought peace rather than death and pronouncing judgment upon me. He said, you will be the deliverer for the people of Israel. You will be that valiant warrior. But before God uses you, you have to deal with the sin in your own house. My father's house, Joash, had built an idol to Baal and an Asherah pole in the center of the community in which we resided. And all the people in that area came and worshiped Baal. And I knew that it had to be torn down. I knew that we had to turn our hearts back to the true God. And I dared not go during the day. I knew that I would be overcome, and I still had a measure of fear in my heart. But I got some of my servants, and we went to the altar of Baal by night, and we took the only remaining calf that we had, and we sacrificed it on the altar and used the wood of the Asherah pole for the fire. And we made the sacrifice unto the true God, unto Jehovah, destroying the altar of Baal. And in the morning the smoke was rising from that altar. And the men of the village came out, and they said, what is this? Who has done this? And the finger was pointed at me, Gideon. And they would have came against me. And they came and pounded on the door of my home. And my father Joash went out to them, and he rebuked them. He said, if you have any focus in who Baal is, if you think he has any power, then let him come and contend for himself. They were silenced. They knew that they had transgressed the laws of Israel. They knew that they had allowed this altar to be built, and it would be a means of judgment upon them. And so they backed away, and their mouths were shut and silenced. My father stood forth for me, and he said, Gideon, from this day you will be called Jerubbaal, because you have contended against Baal, and you have stood with the people of God. The houses of God's people have to be cleansed before God can move forward in power and bring victory upon them. And then God's Spirit came upon me. And He said, you will lead the army of Israel against those that have come against God's people. And so I knew that God had called me to take that position and to take that stand. But I was again fearful. I knew what God's will was, but I just didn't think that His strength would be with me. I didn't think that He would bless me, that He would use me, a common, ordinary vessel such as I am. And so I brought forth a fleece from my flock. And I said, God, if you'll please allow me to make this test before you and place this fleece upon the ground. And Lord, if this fleece in the morning, if all around is dry, but the fleece is wet, then I'll know that you are with me, that your hand is upon me. Again, I wasn't seeking for the will of God by laying out a fleece. I knew what God's will was. It was a test to see if God would strengthen me and use me as a vessel of His choosing. I couldn't hardly wait throughout the night to see what had transpired. And I came quickly in the morning and found the fleece, and it was sopping wet. It was filled with moisture. I picked it up and wrung it out, and a cup full of moisture came forth from the fleece, but all around was completely dry. I thought, well, it perhaps could be just some strange anomaly. It may be just a happenstance of some sort. And so I said, God, please be patient with me, but I ask you again for another test. Just to show that your hand is with me, that you are guiding me as your vessel. This time, Lord, as I lay the fleece out, may the fleece be dry and all around be wet. God allowed for the test to go forward. The next morning I came to my fleece, and I saw that it was just as I'd requested. The fleece was absolutely dry, and all around the grass was wet with dew. The ground was just soft with the moisture from the morning dew. I knew God's hand was upon me, and God would use me, even me, as His vessel. God called for me to sound the trumpet and to call forth for the men of Israel to come forth. And I sounded the trumpet out throughout all the land of the tribe of Manasseh, and the tribe of Naphtali, and the tribe of Asher, and the tribe of Zebulun. And the men came to my aid, and they came to assist, and came to go into battle against the Midianites and the Ammonites. They came, and they came ready to go into conflict, into battle. But yet there was still some fear and trepidation among them. And God saw that in their heart. And God knew the pride of the people of Israel. And God said, the 32,000 men that had come forward to go into battle against the Ammonites and the Midianites, He knew it was far too many, even though it was far less than what would be needed to come against such a massive army. And God said, the glory will not go to me, it will go to Israel unless that number is decreased. So tell all of those who have any fear in their heart, who have any desire to be with their family, and a desire not to fight, and a desire not to go into battle, to go to their homes. There are no repercussions. There's no judgment against them. They can just leave. 22,000 men left. Only 10,000 remained. God said, that's still far too few. Far too many for the conflict and glory to be given to God. So He devised of Himself a way to determine who should stay and who should go. He said, take the men down to the water, and you will see, as I speak to you, how to determine who should go into battle and who should go back to their homes. He said, have them go to the water's edge and drink from the water. Tell them to replenish themselves and to drink heartily.
And of those 10,000 men, 9,700 of them got down on both knees, put their face in the water, and drew the water up to their mouth and drank. And only 300 stood on one knee and brought the water up to their mouths and looked out across the land as they drank. God said, those are the ones who will go into conflict and into battle. They are distinguished and set apart from the others, and this is the test that will determine who will go into war. The others were sent home. This was God's plan. We were to go against the Midianites and the Ammonites, but still God knew my heart, and He knew there was still a measure of fear within me. He said, if you still are concerned about whether the victory is going to be for Israel, go into the camp of the enemy. Go in silently and sneak in stealthily among them and hear the word of God and hear what God is going to do. Take your servant Purah with you and go and find out. So when the darkness came, and under the cover of darkness, my servant Purah and I came into one of the outposts on the outskirts of the Midianite camp. And we came into an encampment of soldiers that were there on watch for the entire Midianite army. And we heard them as they were sitting around the fire talking and discussing. And one said to another, I've had a dream. And the other said, tell me your dream, tell me. And he was anxious to hear. And the one who had the dream said, I dreamed that a barley loaf rolled out of the hills and ran down and crashed upon the tent of the Midianites. The other said, I know what the meaning of this is. The meaning is that Gideon and the men of Israel will come against us and they will crush us. We were looked at as just that common barley loaf. Insignificant and not amounting to much, but yet the tool of God to crush the Midianite army. And the word of that dream began to spread from one part of the camp to the next, and the men were unsettled and they were unnerved at the prospect of the fact that the army of God was coming against them. They were terrified before battle even came to the forefront. On the next day, God showed me a plan. He said, when evening comes and the darkness prevails, take a clay pot and put a torch inside the pot. Take your sword in your hand and take the trumpet and call forth for the men of those who were remaining in the camp of Israel, the 300 men, and divide them into 3 different groups, 100 on each side of the encampment of the Midianites. Move them all around the territory so that they are encamped on opposite sides of the Midianite camp. And at the signal, after they have spaced themselves out down the enemy line, when the signal is given, you are to sound the trumpet. You are to give the shout of God unto the camp of the Midianites from Israel, and you are to raise your sword. Bring forth the torch from the clay pot and raise it high into the darkened sky, and watch what the hand of God will do. So that our men spaced themselves out, and they were there on the horizon and all around the encampment of the Midianite armies, around the circumference and the perimeter. And all the men were just a distance apart so they could watch and see the signal. And when I sounded forth the trumpet of God, when I sounded forth the trumpet and the signal was given, they broke their clay pots and raised their torches into the darkened sky. And we drew our swords, and I cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon, the sword of the Lord of Gideon. And the shriek that came forth from those 300 men terrorized the armies of the Midianites and the Ammonites. Varying languages caused confusion in the camp. They were already unsettled because of the rumor of the dream that had spread in among them. And seeing the lights in this darkened sky at night, and hearing the shriek of the soldiers shouting out from the top of their lungs, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And seeing all of these things, the sound of the trumpet, they knew that they were completely undone. And they began to panic and fight against themselves, and they destroyed themselves. And those that remained went running into the hills in the darkness of the night. And we followed after and slew them. And others were called to come and clean up the residue of those that had escaped to the hills. The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. I was able to see what God saw. God saw something I didn't see. Because God saw what He can do through a willing heart and a willing life. He can do great, exceeding things through a people who are surrendered and committed to Him, whose hearts are turned wholly and fully to God, who are turned away from the things of the flesh and the things of the world, who are willing to worship God in His holiness and in His majesty, and come before Him and submit their lives into His care and His keeping. God heard Israel. God once again redeemed Israel. And God used just an ordinary hacker of trees, bringing him to the forefront and making him a hero of the faith. God has many heroes of the faith. You could be one. But He's calling for you to trust Him and let Him guide your life and let Him mold you and use you as He sees fit. Because you see, it's not who you are and what you're about. It's not about your abilities. It's about who He is and what He can do with a willing heart and a committed life. I don't know where your heart is. I don't know where you are today. You may be a worshiper of Baal. You may have given yourself to the things of the world, the material interests and pursuits of the flesh. And until you're willing to turn to God, only chastisement and perhaps judgment will come against you. How much better it would be to be able to raise the sword of the Spirit, dressed in the armor of God, standing boldly as God's man and God's woman, sounding forth a clear trumpet sound into this decadent world in which we live, that there is hope, there is help, there is victory, but only in the mighty name of God. In His name, may you be blessed and experience that victory. And may God bless you all.